tunnels are underground, where none of the children will ever be found. They wandered away to join the show and lost their way in the world below. They joined the circus and left their town. Now they live here down with the clown.
Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into A Storm of Spoilers, a podcast covering the adaptation of Stephen King's It, that is Welcome to Derry on HBO. This podcast is split into two sections. The first section we call The Calm. We will only cover a single piece of It media. This week, the 6th episode of Welcome to Derry on HBO, titled In the Name of the Father, and will not spoil anything we know about future episodes of Welcome to Derry, though we do know what happens at the black spot from the source material. In the second Storm section, Neil and I will break down what to expect from It, Welcome to Derry, based on the teaser for next week's episode, some foreknowledge of what production has hinted is ahead, and descriptions of the final episodes. We're not spoiling, we're enriching. Hello again, I am Dave Gonzalez, and I have read the book by Stephen King.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I have not read the book by Stephen King, but I have learned to put all of my clown-based trauma in a box and close it tight. Welcome back, of course, to A Storm of Spoilers. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Next week, we will be back on the 8th, Monday. We're one day late this week, but we'll be back on schedule next week for episode 7, titled The Black Spot, which by the time you're done listening to this podcast, it'll be obvious what that all means. Our Derry era, of course, we got 2 more episodes, which means we've got 2 more weeks. And then we might have some fun stuff here at the end of the year. We're probably going to take a couple weeks off. And then in January, we will be covering A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, returning to our roots as a podcast that is covering a story of Westeros. So mark your calendars there and let your Game of Thrones friends know that Storm of Spoilers will be back on that beat. If you would like to watch this podcast, if you're just hearing it only at this point, you can follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/@DaveandNeil, Da7e and Neil. And you can see, Dave's t-shirt, my sweatshirt, what we're wearing this week, and see us as we speak words into microphones. If you'd like more from Dave and I, you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/DaveandNeil, spelled the same way. Get bonus content from some of the adventures we've had in this feed, all the way back to the aforementioned Game of Thrones era and our Lost rewatch, and plenty of new stuff that Dave and I put out every week, from our weekly adventure pod to our Hannibal rewatch podcast. If you subscribe at the highest level, you get the Hannibal rewatch, and we also did a Leftovers podcast and a Twin Peaks rewatch. Our adventure pod, which is available to everybody at all levels, is entering December, which is our annual recap of the year. Dave and Neil relive 2025. So we're I guess very excited to go back, and at least this week, we're going to be doing our list of the 10 essential TV shows of the year, which is going to be fun. So join us. It is always a good time to join us over on Patreon. If you would like to get in touch with this show, you can always send us a raven, stormofspoilers@gmail.com. We do have a email to read here in just a little bit. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. The rule, of course, leave us 5-star rating, say whatever you want. Didn't get any reviews this week. Didn't get any comments. We did get some comments on Spotify, Dave, but not on any of our Welcome to Derry. We still get occasional comments, though, on some of our previous episodes of like the Lost project, which
nice.
is always hard.
Maybe, hopefully nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just like people talking to the podcast about like their Lost thoughts. So to the person who just got to Ji-Yun, the episode in, I think it's like season 6, good for you. Shout out to the people still doing the Lost Watch project. All right, moving on. Let's start with a little listener email here to kick off the calm. This is from Janik, or because they're from Denmark, it could be Yannick. They have a few thoughts for us here. I'm going to read them all. They say, great catch on the turtle bracelet charm from last week. It's almost certainly what is keeping the clown at bay. They're changing a lot of lore in the show, but I think there is a core conceit to the powers of the it creature. If you believe that something will have an effect on it, then it will have that desired effect. Silver slingshot bullets, battery acid inhalers, etc. The cage is working because the indigenous people believe that it would work. More importantly, they have kept the story alive through generations, so belief in the 13 pillars could be upheld, sustaining their power. Lily doesn't know that the cat's paw dagger is even there, but it is still repelled by something. As a screenwriter, I would find it irresistibly poetic that it would be an item given to Lily by Maddie, whose form it perversely used to lure the kids into the sewers in the first place, the turtle. Speaking of turtles, I found it interesting that Leroy and Polly removed their helmets, the turtle shell of the noggin, and then it starts messing with them for real. I find the death of Polly extremely poorly executed. The logistics of him jumping in front of the gun was apparently so ludicrous that they just gave up trying to film it and showed the aftermath. Also, why was he there? He's a pilot. They have soldiers on the base that would ideally be trained for the exact mission to happen at some point, even though they seem entirely hapless and unprepared. So lots of thoughts here. And I think I didn't actually clock the helmet thing. That's a good call. That the helmet is the turtle shell of the noggin. That's excellent wordplay there.
And I always think about that as that.
And yeah, I think the Polly's death is a little clunky, but and I think when the first time I watched it, I did sort of have like a eyebrow raised to the logistics of it. Like, how did he get in front of him so quickly? But I don't know. It's one of those things you just kind of have to brush past because of it's not really about the accurate logistics of the moment, but more of the dramatic tension of the moment. So, and hopefully it is something that is worth having him there, right? Like, I feel like maybe his ghost will come into play at some point. Maybe Dick Halloran will have to have a conversation with his ghost at some point. Like, I think the answer to like why Polly was there is like story reasons,
Right.
Like we see the scene between Will and his father this week where Will says the thing and then, Leroy hits him because that's sort of like the worst thing he could have said to him at that moment. Not that he deserved to get hit, obviously, but like he hit the nerve right on the head. So
if Polly hadn't been there, Polly would have been one of the manifestations of it. Like, Polly just needs to be like linked to the Leroy character. And that is grace I will give it because it's a television show. And I guess also an interesting way to sort of segue into this episode of television, because the bonus of having an extra day is I had extra time to watch the episode and read more reviews of the episode. And I was really struck, I think, in the dichotomy between something like the review that appeared on the AV Club, the site, and the review that appeared on Vulture, in that the Vulture one was like, after really picking up with like what they were doing this season last week, we sort of like paused to have these moments and like sort of get mired down in where we are in the story. Whereas the AV Club was like, instead of dealing with like a messy plot, we instead stop and anchor ourselves in the characters for a week. So how did it play for you this week in stopping for In the Name of the Father? Did it feel like a bunch of table setting for a HBO-esque penultimate battle episode next week? Or was it like a good moment to stop and focus on like the kids amidst this Cold War clown bomb trap?
Well, I mean, I felt like it was a little bit of both, right? It felt very much like, the episode before the penultimate episode, the table setting episode. But it accomplishes the other thing, which is allowing us to sort of ruminate in what the characters are doing. It accomplishes a lot in, I think, unfortunately or sadly or making me anxious, setting up certain characters to be even more likable so that they can snatch them away later. And I think that is an important thing to be able to do right before you just get into the big action. And so I think that the show, and I would say that especially in this era of not having 10 episodes or more in your seasons to be able to sort of spread out, this is something that you would kind of be able to do. You know, if you had 10 or 12 episodes, you kind of be able to do this along the way in between, you know, bigger dramatic and bigger action beats. But it's kind of nice that they have the room to be able to do it here, so that now we can sort of just hit the accelerator and finish it out with the next 2 episodes. And I don't think we really lose anything. Like, I don't think it slows down too much. I do think that this character development is very important, right? Especially with the kids. And I think that maybe we're still missing some pieces with some of the adults. But there's still plenty of time. Like, I feel like other than the one scene, we really don't get a whole lot. Well, I guess we do get a couple of scenes with Major Hanlon, but I feel like we don't do a ton of dealing with him.
Did Daniel make it out of the sewers?
Right. That's
that would be nice to know. We get a mention about General Shaw, that he's, you know, pressing onward despite the death of the soldiers, but we don't really get to see that much of him. So I could see what you're talking about, where there's also, because this episode is such a build up to all of our characters being in one place where some stuff's, or not all of our characters, but a lot of our characters being in a place where some stuff's going to go down. It is interesting that sort of characters like Shaw and Rose, who we know don't appear in the 80s, don't necessarily seem to have a place to insert themselves into the drama that's happening, which I assume means we have, you know, to deal with them in the finale episode of the season. But I do appreciate the time that the series has taken here, knowing that we're closer to the end of it than we are to the beginning of it, to each iteration of what we would call the losers having their own sort of flavor for when they meet up with it. Like the first time, like Lily and Ronnie are definitely on the same side about like trying to, you know, help. I'm sorry. The very first time we think Teddy and Phil are going to be reoccurring characters throughout the series,
right? And
they die. The second time, Lily and Ronnie are sort of like paired up to try to get photos of it, and we have to like make believers out of some more kids. And this episode, considering last week we were sort of talking about like, oh, I guess, you know, Marge is technically part of the Losers Club now. Now she's like fully part of it, so much so that her and Rich's relationship goes from just holding hands in the sewers to sort of much more over several like scenes, which is not always a luxury you get in abridged storytelling. So I see what they're going for, and it was definitely working for me in the moment. I can sort of see if you thought that this was a particular type of lore show, that this episode basically corrals it around this sort of Ingrid Kirsch, Periwinkle, Gray reveal.
Sure.
But
I liked because it was just us being right about a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So I'm just like, all right, this is good lore because this is theories paying up, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. And then I also, not only do I enjoy being right about it, but I do agree, or I do like that they used a little bit of Pennywise lore to be the backbone for the others stuff. So there's lots of talk about fathers, whether it be Ingrid like serving her father, or Will's conflict with his father, or Ronnie looking for her father, and then Will sort of finding like a surrogate father-in-law for his age, sort of getting to talk to Hank about War of the Worlds. So I do think that there's the heart of a television show still in this narrative, which I'm going to give it a little bit of leeway for. You mentioned earlier on that we're going to, on our other podcast, talk about the 10 essential television shows of 2025. I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that we're at least going to talk a little bit about the pit and how it was just able to recommit to what makes television specifically television. It's not an 8-hour movie that is, split into things. We do have thematic chunks. I saw that this episode was a little bit more leading into the thematic chunk as it was doing the necessary table setting. So it did ultimately work for me.
Yeah.
Although I don't think it was as surprising as some episodes, because as you mentioned, we were sort of led here, which is,
Sure.
I guess, brings back the old debate. Is it necessarily bad that we guessed it, or is it just mean that the story was told correctly, that we came to a conclusion that makes sense?
I mean, I think that it doesn't, it doesn't have to be this complex puzzle. I think as soon as we knew that Ingrid was Mrs. Kirsch, then the pieces started to fall into place. I wanted to say one more thing about this being a table setting episode. I think that one of the things that makes a very effective table setting episode is how much it can accomplish and where it sort of gets to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the way this thing builds and then hits its cliffhanger right at the end has set the show up to be able to spend as much time as it needs doing sort of the big dramatic action next week, right? Like if the events that are going to go down at the black spot need to be the entire episode next week, they've got all of that room now because it's already started in front of our eyes. If it only needs to be the first half of the episode, we're already off and running. So I think that, it's not just about the show being able to slow down and take a little time to develop some of these relationships and some of these characters, but where it builds to and where it ends to. It's not just about getting to like a dramatic high point and giving us a juicy cliffhanger. It's about creating the room that they'll be able to use next week in their penultimate episode to, who knows? Maybe whatever's about to happen at the black spot, as we kind of see in the next week trailer that we'll talk about in the storm, maybe that's only the first 20 minutes of the episode next week. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't even know is coming. So I think that's a nice little gift that the writers have given themselves with this episode.
Yeah. Very, very interesting episode here. Let's dissect it a little bit more by talking about our corners. This week, the most 1960s things are the historical context corner. I think it's more historical context than 1960s for a lot of these, because with the exception of some very specific ones, it's more just sort of like a feel. Like at first, the first time I watched this episode, and I was taking notes, and like most 1960s thing is just like forming up a posse. And I'm like, I think that's just a sign I've been living in big cities for too long in my life, because I don't think we're beyond a world where a child killer that went a fugitive during a suspected child killer that became a fugitive during like a bus accident during like a prison transfer. I would like to say innocent until proven guilty, but I don't think even in current America that we're beyond posses and racism based influences, especially when, like this show is doing, it is sort of making it. I think the posse would look a little bit different now. They'd be far more heavily militarized. They'd be a bunch of, heavy set dudes with big old beer bellies covered up by Kevlar vests and decked out in camo with their AR-15s. But the vibe would be similar. Yeah, I think so.
And, if the racial dynamics were the same, it would have a similarly racist overtone to it.
Yeah. I've seen some criticism of this show of sort of like using racism as like an obvious theme, but never actually saying it on its face. Like no one's using any slurs or no one's saying like those people. They're just sort of allowing us to put it onto the narrative because it's visually there on the narrative. But then again, I've also seen criticism on, like comment on the comment side, not in the written review side, of people being like, why are they focusing so much on race?
Mhm.
And then luckily people would respond to them, like, here's that was a real tension in America in the 60s, in all parts of America, not
Sure.
just the South.
I do think
So
this does, again, as a person who was born in the North and has lived half of my life in the South as well, this to me feels kind of like an authentic thing of the 1960s, where this is one of the ways in which the North differentiated itself from the South, where it was like, we're less racist because we just don't say it out loud as much as people in the South. So it's
Yes.
like, that kind of is, at least from my perception, how it was, where it was like the racism was still there. They just weren't flinging slurs like they were, like you would if you were just like some random person in like Arkansas.
Right. I think they have Sheriff Bowers say something like that to Charlotte in an earlier episode. It's like, this isn't the South,
Yeah.
but it is sort of like constantly on in the background, and us being aware of it as viewers is the characters being aware with it. I like that take. But then you have some good ones from our sojourns back with Rich and Marge. Those school lunches.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, those school lunches look really good. They make a very important point of showing some overhead shots of them. Specifically, the Jell-O just looks like they didn't have as many preservatives. The food wasn't as fake back then. I assume those were free school lunches because we had a better social safety net in the 1960s in America. So it was just like they were eating like real food. And I feel like that's a good representation of how much better school lunches were than, especially when I was growing up, because like it was just like shitty pizza when I was in elementary school or high school. So yes, the school lunch stood out to me as being a little bit more decadent because it was the 1960s. And then the patty cakes make a Ricky Ricardo reference, which I would be easy to forget because we weren't around, that I Love Lucy was like one of the most popular cultural things of the 1950s. So by the early 60s, which is where this is set, people would have had that as part of their their cultural lexicon and the things that they would say. So I guess,
well, they got him ethnically correct. I didn't realize until like I was thinking about this episode that like I have definitely been I was called Ricky Ricardo occasionally in like elementary school. But kids had no idea versus like Cuban versus Mexican descent or immigration or anything like that. So this moment definitely made me bond with Rich. And Rich is sort of nonchalant at being called a name. I was like, that was definitely me. But it also led me to get really into I Love Lucy. And Lucy and Desi did great things for Hollywood and basically gave us Star Trek. So even less of a insult now being called a Ricky Ricardo.
I mean, he's an icon, and it was one of a rare piece of, I guess, positive representation, even though it was used as light racism.
Yeah. I mean, it's either light racism or it's a comment about his hair, in which case we did call kids with that particular hair Ace Ventura back in my day.
Sure.
So it's, there's always a way to make fun of kids about their over product hair. Children are cruel. I did want to point out the Universal monsters are the plastic Halloween masks that our new old racists are wearing at the very end of the episode. This could be because of the, sort of over marketing of those specific Halloween costumes in the 50s when Halloween sort of like took off big in suburban America. The capability to sort of mass churn out these costumes, the Universal monsters, were some of the basic costumes in the 50s going into the 60s, but also they were the things that Stephen King was afraid of when he was a child, so they make it into the book. So this could be a book Easter egg, or it could be a in context thing, but it's definitely why all those plastic Halloween masks are so readily available, would be the time period. It also seems like maybe we're getting towards that time period because Rich also makes a joke about they have their Halloween costumes figured out. So maybe we're approaching autumn. I don't necessarily know where we are in time.
Yeah. Seems kind of hard to tell. I mean, they definitely are. It's not summer based on how they're dressing.
Right. And school's in session, so could be autumn.
I'm thinking
there's no snow yet.
I'm thinking, yeah, fall makes sense.
And then we have an actual 1960s thing, which would be the poster of Sarah Vaughan that Richie gives a little kiss to in the black spot. She, of course, would still be active, but a jazz and bebop singer who was active in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Sure.
Pretty great.
Proof that Rich is a real one, a real fan.
Knows his musical interests, and I thought, at least until this episode, that Rich's like drumsticks were like a little character accent that would never actually become referenced. But he does get to jam here with the Black Spot Band. And as a matter of fact, about halfway through this episode, I was like, interesting that they're adapting the Black Spot, but more as like a hideaway, not necessarily as this cultural place. But then the second half of the episode kicks in and we get to see the thing that is very often being compared to Sinners online because it is 2025, but is just Black people having a good time, which is the point of Sinners. But why not? We get to see, Rich play some drums. Marge and Rich have some Air Force Coke, which I've also seen some people comment on. How did you feel about? I
mean, this is honestly could also be a 1960s thing, right? Because I feel like generationally, as we go along, it's like I feel like our parents' generation was the generation of like, let your kid have a sip of beer when they're a teenager. But like the generation before that was even a little bit more lax with when they would let their kid have a sip of alcohol.
I'm surprised there's not at least one kid who is smoking, because that is happening even in the the book, and in the 80s version of it is the kids are smoking, but here they just get to have some booze. But yes, a Black airman in the already illegal club, like they don't have a liquor license, so it doesn't really, if they're caught, they're caught. They're not going to be the worst thing that they get charged with, if they get charged at all, is not going to be serving a minor. So I could see this,
I don't think it was as big of a deal in the 60s as it would be today, especially because, there's, I don't know, that this was even before like latchkey kids. I don't know. They were just, kids grew up a lot quicker back in the day. Yeah.
And he's one of Will's friends. He knows that the kids are Will's friends, and all these kids seem to be party to a felony and harboring a fugitive. So why not let them have some Jack and Cokes? Sure. I dig it. I dig it in theory. I could also get, if the show is smarter than I'm giving it credit for, it is dulling the natural shining senses that children have, much like Dick Halloran is dulling his senses with alcohol. Like, having some sort of intoxicant in you makes you an easier target for it when it decides to attack.
I mean, listen, this makes me feel even worse or scared for Rich. This is a good place to stop and talk about this for a second, because I feel like we've been dancing around this for the last several episodes. how we're we're a little worried about Rich.
Right.
And whether or not he's going to be one of the losers who doesn't make it out of this season.
Yes.
And, like the love letter in the shoe, the hopeless romantic nature of it, the fact that the really great theory that, Marge might be one of the losers in the 1980s Mom, and that, Rich is the namesake for Richie, which would be really fun. But also, potentially having a very tragic backstory. All of this sort of adding up to like being worried that this is the kid who's not going to make it. But like they did several things in this episode that I feel like is TV language for like piling on a charm offensive for this kid, right? Like the scene where he helps her with her bandage and he's just like super cool about it, all the way up to like being like,
that's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, like he's just like awesome about it. Giving her the eye patch that's like a family heirloom is great. And then, of course, the playing of the drums at the black spot is like further endearing this character to the audience so that when he gets Ned Starked in the penultimate episode or some shit, we're all going to be like, why did you have to take Rich? You could have taken any of the other children. So I'm worried about Rich, and this episode actually just made it like 100 times worse.
Yeah. In terms of like all of the kids being in danger just because we don't, I mean, we could go down the list, but essentially we don't know about any of them besides Will existing in the primary narrative of it. As a matter of fact,
and oddly enough, Will's the only one who, well, I guess Will didn't have a drink yet at the black spot.
Will didn't have a drink yet. Ronnie, I guess, didn't have a drink yet. But Ronnie also, Veronica Grogan is one of the names used when Bev hears voices coming out of the pipes. So at some point, Veronica Grogan becomes a victim of it. And that's a little tough. But like otherwise, it's just like some of these kids know too much. But also Leroy knows too much.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting things about this episode is I do really like what happens with the Hanlons. I'm sad we don't get more movement on the Hanlon side, but I do like the little bit that we do get, picking up with sort of like Will standing up to his dad and saying, very hurtful things, but also having Will accurately identify for the audience that it is influencing Leroy a little bit to sort of bring him to blows, the point where he'll hit his son. And then sort of like Leroy rededicating himself to whatever Shaw's mission is and asking Dick Halloran like really dumb things about like asking the ghosts what to do about like Pennywise is so far from where we see him in It Chapter 1. I'm wondering what has to happen to him in the remaining 2 hours that we have with him to sort of make him change his tune from being like aggressively, this is going to happen, to aggressively, not only am I not in the military anymore, but I'm not going to leave Derry for some reason.
Yeah.
All seems very interesting because staying in Derry would be the part that makes him remember all of this. It's the leaving that would make me think maybe he forgot.
Yeah.
But he's still there with the...
I do kind of wonder if the show has a bit of an out on this, where they don't have to necessarily get Leroy Hanlon all the way there, because there's still the event of like Will's death that comes later, right? That we know happens when Mike is a child. So like that could be a traumatic event that causes another change in Leroy that turns him into the guy that we see in Chapter 1. So I think maybe they've got a little bit of like gray area that they can play with Leroy Hanlon, but I do think they have to answer the question of like, why would he stay? Right. Because at the moment, all of the momentum for the Hanlon family is going back to Louisiana and getting the hell out of here. So I think it makes me feel like something obviously very bad is going to happen. It's going to prevent Hank from leaving. town, right? Like Derry's not going to let go of him just yet. And it makes me worried about oh shit, what's Will's mom's name? Charlotte. It makes me very worried about the fate of Charlotte Hanlon, especially because we've seen her, quote unquote, die already once on screen.
Yeah, I think there's still a world where Charlotte gets out.
Yeah,
I don't think that she would necessarily abandon her son, but there's also a world where Will comes back to Derry, and that just happens in between the 60s and the 80s. That seems like lots of stuff could happen in those 20 years. But I also want to revisit that when we get to the storm, because maybe the show is setting us up for something. I just don't want to speculate here because it's about some of the things we might know. Let's instead move on to the Kingverse Easter egg of the week. This one I haven't seen called out too much, but it did read a certain way for me. When Dick is describing to Leroy about his shine condition, which we talked about a lot last week, only for Dick Haller to sort of give the abridged version of what we talked about last week on the podcast in the actual episode. He says about the dead, they know things we don't, things the living aren't meant to know. And that is a sort of theme of the book and certain adaptations of Pet Sematary, is when in that book, there's a ancient Indian burial ground. It's a Micmac burial ground that raises anything that's buried in it. And you can do it for pets, and eventually you do it for humans because the temptation is too great for certain humans, and that brings them back wrong. But definitely in some of the newer adaptations of Pet Sematary and in the book Pet Sematary, the idea isn't that it like comes back wrong. It's that it isn't them. It is like a dark demon side version of them that has breached the, barrier between life and death and come back with like horrible knowledge.
Right. Like they've seen some shit.
They've seen some shit, but that shit sort of like also can span all of space time. Like they have some truths that we aren't supposed to know about, and they sort of can give hints to us, which would be interesting if Dick ultimately opens himself up to that, and then it sort of drives him somehow to the Overlook later in life. But I was really interested in this sort of slight change definition from what we turned last week, where we had talked about it in terms of Dr. Sleep, both the movie and the novel, this shining power to put everything in a box. But it seems a little bit different here, because instead of putting individual ghosts into a box, like is how it worked in Dr. Sleep, it appears like Dick was able to put one of his abilities into a box, which is his ability to see the dead people everywhere. And so rather than even control it, because we know when we've seen Dick use the Shining so far, he has mostly been like touching objects or exploring somebody else's mind. He hasn't been seeing dead people with the exception of his grandmother. So it seems like he was able to sort of either turn down or tune out that ability rather than the individual ghosts, which I thought was an interesting, I don't know if it was an expansion or a departure from how the box theory worked. But it does mean that maybe individual ghosts and individual boxes is Dick's way out of this. So we could see him sort of like by the end of the season start putting his boxes back together, which should bring him to a more peaceful place when we get to The Shining, when we quote unquote. I don't think this show's going there.
It's funny because as you're talking about it, I'm wondering, because of what we know about like the Machetes and how big fans they are, obviously, of like the whole Kingverse, and how littered this show is with Kingverse references and Easter eggs, how likely you think it is, especially because of how centered this show is on Dick Halloran, that we get to the end, and whether it's like right at the end or like a post-credit scene of some kind, we get some sort of either reference or even like a direct shot of Dick Halloran in Colorado, or like moving to Colorado. Like, do you feel like they can resist the urge to spend all this time with Dick Halloran and then not at least do a little bit of Overlook reference at the end?
I think that's a good question. My initial response is no, because my initial response is you keep this first season really pure, where we're mostly basing it on it.
Mm-hmm.
And Dick Halloran's in it. So you have this like, thing that like we have the textual basis to spin off this character. There's nothing necessarily in it that says anything about the Overlook.
Sure.
But there is in the book that isn't in this adaptation. He's already a cook. He's like an army cook. So he goes to be the Overlook, to be the head cook.
Mm-hmm.
So he's sort of this chef throughout. I could see maybe something like that being his turning point. So like he becomes a chef. I think if they take it all the way to like he's driving to Colorado to take a chef's job, I think that might be a little too far.
Sure.
Nodding towards a property that they don't, I think, have the rights to use at this point.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because if their plan is to work backward in time with these multiple seasons, this would be the only place they would be able to do it, would be in a season one. So I don't think you could go back to a 1935 set season and then still have Dick Halloran be around. So like this is the only time they're going to be able to have Dick Halloran, unless they're doing weird timey-wimey flashes in the other seasons.
Well, Castle Rock also, the Hulu show that lasted for 2 seasons, was always sort of nodding towards it, maybe wanting to do a Colorado-based season, both so it could do The Shining and Misery and these like different things. But that ended up never happening. It would be hilarious to me if somehow Welcome to Derry has done so well. Not only are they going to do 2 more episodes, but they like do a, Shining 3rd Castle Rock season, revive Castle Rock at Hulu. Like the companies don't make sense.
Sure.
Otherwise, I think it would be really fun. But I
mean,
think,
that there's some executive in Hollywood, probably at Warner Brothers or wherever, who's like wants to do a Shining TV show.
Sure.
And Stephen King says yes to a lot of things. So I'm sure that it's in the ether somewhere.
I mean, I think this could be a Shining TV show. I think because even if there wasn't a textual basis for, using the interludes of it, the novel, to make this television show, if I was blue skying a season 2 of Welcome to Derry, I would be like, well, we know that like it can't necessarily touch. Well, actually, we don't know. This entire first season of Welcome to Derry, I think we talked about this last week with like the trap of excessive lore, and sort of the email touched on it, our listener email from Yannick, about if you believe in something, then it might have power over it. So all this sort of lore that we're piling onto it, like it needs to be these pillars, and these pillars are going to work, or the cat's paw dagger is going to work better than like the turtle. Really, it's a story about belief. So this whole season could end with, and everything we believed is wrong. I think especially they're telegraphing for Ingrid, because Ingrid's like, if I'm nice enough as Periwinkle, the adult version of his daughter, if I'm nice enough, this thing that has possessed my father will let my father go. That's not going to work out for her. There's just not a world in the world of it where that works out for her.
Yeah, I mean,
so I'm pretty sure it's going to end
we know
up with
where
her
that
dying.
ends with for Mrs. Kirsch, right? We've seen it chapter 2.
Yes. So like it's anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what they think a further story is.
Yeah. What I'm
when
saying
it's a
is
season 2. What are the elements that make it show? Is The Shining, is some sort of supernaturally powered child part of that? Because it could have been, we talked about this previously, it could have been that the original losers, because there was a group of them and they all shined a little bit, had the power to, face Pennywise.
Yeah. And the other thing I'm saying is that I'm enjoying Chris Chalk's performance as Dick Halloran so much that, when I think about The Shining, which was distributed by Warner Brothers, which owns HBO, I would watch a young Dick Halloran moves to Colorado show. I'm just saying.
I'm into it. I also would think it would be fun because I'm also enjoying Chris Chalk's performance and Joe Adepo's performance, that I would also like it if they pull an American Horror Story and just cast the same actors as different roles in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like Derry Echoes. I don't know. Maybe that's too weird, but
Sure.
Again, all lore could be a trap. There's so many theories, some of which maybe we'll talk about in the store, maybe not, floating around about which one of these characters is the secret parent of one of the losers. You already talked about the one for Richie. There's one that exists for basically all the other losers. And so it's interesting that, on one hand, we could be really into the lore, but on the other hand, it might mean nothing because it is playing with us ultimately, like it's playing with Ingrid Kirsch.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move to popping the polygon balloon. Pickle Dad, one of my favorite reoccurring visual effects of the year at this point.
Yeah. And I would
Just
argue
always good when he shows up.
that it looks better every time they bring it out. I think that this Pickle Dad in the desk is the best that this has looked so far. It looked a little cheesy in that first scene in the grocery store. And then obviously there was the one in the sewer, which they were, tactfully covering up with darkness. But this one, very brightly lit, sort of out in the open, nowhere to hide imperfections, looks really good, especially for how goofy the design is of Pickle Dad. That it's not just that it
still has the hand holding his head together.
Yeah.
Even though it's in the desk, which is just yes.
And he's like an octopus monster kind of thing now. It's growing on me. I wasn't a huge fan of the design at first, but as it looks better and better each time they pull it out, I think it's pretty great.
I also think the voice is really funny. It sounds like me trying to do some sort of offensive accent, but failing. But you're a bad daughter. I don't know what that is. Is it Maine with Italian Maine? I don't know what that is.
It sounds like a Simpsons voice.
It does. It's pretty great. And then this time it tells her, if you try, you die, which is what it told Bill when it kidnapped Beverly in chapter 2. And it also appears in the book. So it gets a nice little callback to what it usually says, which is don't go in the sewer.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't want people in the sewer unless it brings people into the sewer, especially not children that maybe have a dagger that can kill it. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of questions about the dagger.
Sure.
My first one is, how much weapons in schools have rotted my brain? Because the second I saw her sitting in that classroom holding the dagger, I was just like, everybody's fine with this. Everybody's fine with her holding this very sharp, seemingly ancient obsidian dagger.
Yeah. Maybe that's a most 1960s thing, is that no one is freaked out by the fact that she's got a weapon in school. Also, no metal detectors, because you know what they didn't have back in the 1960s? School shootings.
Yes. Pretty crazy, but she is very, very attached to it. She won't let anybody else hold it when they're talking at the standpipe. And then when Pickle Dad shows up, it starts glowing.
Mm-hmm.
She thinks, Lily, at least initially this episode, that they need to go back down because this has the power to kill it. How convinced are you that Lily is correct with that assertion?
I mean, and this might be that my brain has been poisoned by a really good theory about a turtle charm. and how that is a really great misdirect. And I think that works really well, because the fact that she won't let go of it and the fact that it is so sort of prominent to Lily makes me feel like maybe the dagger isn't the key here. But we've also been given quite a bit of lore suggesting that the dagger is what stopped the entity originally, right?
Right.
At least that is what the indigenous people believe was sort of the key. And in the flashback, in the story that Rose tells, the reason why the tribe almost gets entirely wiped out is because the girl runs off with the dagger. Live action Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender series runs off with the dagger, and her tribe almost gets completely wiped. And so I still think that even though the turtle charm thing is great, that yes, maybe the dagger has something to do with. But then again, we are in this position where the people of Derry, these losers, these kids, or any of the people for that matter, can't win.
Right.
Like, we can't kill the clown because the clown comes back in the 80s. We know that canonically. And as much as they can play with, the canon of these events that happened previously, this is also set in a world where those two movies definitely happened. So Pennywise cannot be completely defeated here in the 1960s. So I think that is sort of the rug pull that is coming for these kids, which is they're going to believe that this dagger can work. And I don't think that's going to be enough. Like, that might be enough to like stop the cycle, but it's not going to be enough to kill the entity. Obviously, that is for the ritual of Chud, which we have not even come close to figuring out yet.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting, and it's hard to predict right now because not only are they doing a little bit of a ring of power thing with Lily, where it's hard to tell if her being near the dagger is making her behave more erratically, or if it's just what would happen to anybody who's being psychologically tormented by Pennywise. Like, it would make sense if that's just she's acting normally and it's not the influence of the dagger. Sure. But that being said,
well, and Lily too is like the child. She's the one of these kids that has like the most compounded trauma, right?
Yes.
Like, there's a reason why she's the one who's been to Juniper Hill prior to any of this happening, because like some terrible things have happened to her. And so like, I don't think it's out of the realm of the possibility for her to be acting like this just based on like her life experience and not anything supernatural.
And having her figure out the truth about Miss Kirsch this episode pairs really nicely with her pickle dad showing back up, because one of them wants to like escape her dad, and the other one wants to embrace her dad. So I like all of that. It's just hard to predict because as a television show, they're keeping Lily, who's making assumptions about a dagger, narratively far apart from Rose and Daniel, who actually know what the dagger does. So in the previously on for this week's episode, we see that Rose gives Daniel the dagger, and it's like they know, and she kind of like cuts him off. And then we see Daniel drop the dagger, and then we see the dagger stop it, etc., etc. So we're putting the visual things together. That's all assumption. That is not anybody who actually knows how the dagger works telling us how the dagger works. In order for like Lily to get to Rose, my closest guess is they have to go through Charlotte, because at least the show made a point of introducing Rose to Charlotte as maybe somebody that Charlotte can go to if the town goes crazy. There's like somebody that has sort of tried to warn her. Maybe she could reach out and talk to Rose about it. But yeah, I'm very unsure about the dagger.
Yeah.
It feels like a very classic trap that you think you have the thing that kills it, and it doesn't work. Maybe because you don't believe hard enough for whatever reason. This is a world ultimately where they do kill it, but they just insult it until it's very small and rip its heart out. So how literal are we going to get with our belief thing in this iteration of the book? Who knows, really, necessarily. You point out some other fun things that are not necessarily polygons. Both Marge's eye, the couple of times that we see it, both I think the more goopy version on the standpipe and the slightly more cared for version when she's freaking out the patty cakes, and the soldier ghost with half a head that we see in the barracks, which is pretty great. Yeah,
the Marge one is shout out to the makeup department. Great in both instances. The soldier ghost, that I guess could be a digital effect, especially because there's like a blur effect, but I think that feels like a prosthetic to me. Like that feels like something they would have made. I think it's definitely
augmented. In the past couple of weeks, some sort of behind the scenes shots have shown that basically every time there's been a creature, with the exception of I think Pickle Dad, every other time there's been like a creature, there's been some sort of practical stand-in for it that at least was partially sculpted or was like there to, so everything in the sewer, Uncle Sam Dad, sort of beastly Charlotte, those were all practical makeup effects that were then digitally augmented.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the way they're going, and I'm guessing that's what the soldier with half a head is.
Yeah.
Because it does look great.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, that's the level of detail and care that we've come to expect from an HBO show.
Which brings us to Pennywise lore. If Dick Halloran can see things that are dead, and we hear from him that dead things tend to wander back to where they died, does that mean that well, I guess first of all, do you think we're going to get any clarification on sort of like the Ingrid Bob Gray relationship at all this season? And if we do, does it have to come through Dick Halloran or does it come through Ingrid herself?
I mean, I definitely feel like there's more that the show wants to tell us about that. So yeah, I think it could be both, right? I don't know how much the kids are going to want to interact with Ingrid anymore, especially after this interaction she had with Lily. But I could see Dick Halloran having visions, especially if there's about to be this showdown at the Black Spot and Pennywise shows up. That puts, the proximity to Dick Halloran would potentially show him some pretty gnarly visions. And I think that could take us back to, and I guess the other thing that's kind of curious to me is we see Ingrid putting on her periwinkle costume at the end of this. And my question is like, where's she going? Is she going to the Black Spot? I mean, because she knows that's where Hank is.
It's classically HBO. I think she's the one that reports Hank to the posse.
Sure. But that doesn't mean she's going to stay away.
No. I think she is trying to feed the clown because she wants another shot at like ripping it apart from her dad. But I do like that everybody's converging on the Black Spot for different reasons.
Yeah.
And when it shows up, everybody thinks they know why it's there, but it's just there to feed, which is going to be terrifying in theory. I wonder if Lily ends up going to the Black Spot and that's what sort of, pushes Pennywise back. Or it could be just a very long showdown between these different people seeing different things at the Black Spot in the middle of a massacre / it attack. But I do wonder if they're going to leave it at least a little bit open-ended as to how much Ingrid Kirsch, Periwinkle Gray, is like a human servant of it that it is like using, or how much it is actually like acting to like pretend to be its dad. has it, outside of just like, because when this episode after in the 1930s, Ingrid opens the door to her father, we sort of just see her smiling. We see some light reflected in her eyes. We don't know whatever happened that Pennywise said to convince her to keep bringing her children.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's a difference between like, I don't know. In the books and in the movies, we've seen someone like Henry Bowers be tormented by the spirits of his dead friends, sort of telling him what to do. And that is making him sort of like an instrument of Pennywise. I think it's a lot different than like last week we were speculating that maybe Ingrid was capable of telling Pennywise to wreck the bus to Shawshank to keep Hank within Derry.
Mm-hmm.
Now I sort of think like Ingrid can't tell Pennywise anything. It is a one-way relationship.
Sure.
Where she thinks that's her father possessed by a demon. So she keeps going at it. Pennywise is like, you could stay around as long as you bring me children. But it's not like she could control Pennywise or has any illusions about being able to control Pennywise.
And there is also this element of she seems convinced that she's sort of stumbling upon him by happenstance at times, right? Like she seems surprised that Lily has seen him. She was at the cemetery trying to like catch him. And I think that what that leads me to believe is that she could be caught up in this manipulation where it is messing with her, right? Where she thinks that she's, trying to encounter the clown, encounter the entity to like free her father. And that's just part of the clown's game that part of the entity's game that it's playing with her in order to get her to to put children in danger, essentially. And so it's like she is an unwitting accomplice in this way and has been, we may find out, for a very long time, like maybe since she was a kid, she's been an unwitting accomplice of the entity.
I mean, she does say to Lily that she won't let anything happen to her, and she does seem like somewhat protective of Lily.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible that she can, have a redeeming moment where maybe she is protecting Lily, and that's what makes her realize that clown is not her father?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that moment is one of the moments that makes me feel like she could also be kind of aware of what's happening. Because it's that same moment where she says she's going to protect Lily, and then Lily's like, what about my friends? And she has this look like, don't worry about your friends.
Right.
Like, I can't save everybody kind of deal. So it is equally possible in my mind that Ingrid is an unwitting accomplice that is being manipulated by it, and that she is, I guess, possessed in some way and there's a lot that she's not telling us, right? Like she's part of her is very much aware of what she's doing and that this is all just part of the plan, right? So like maybe, and who knows, maybe this is one of those things where over time she's becoming more and more sort of infected by the entity to where, when she was a kid, she was more of an unwitting accomplice, to where we see her in It Chapter 2, she's just like a golem,
Yeah.
So it's like, as time goes by, as she continues to try to free her father from the extraterrestrial entity, it is further infecting her and sort of entrenching her as like its servant.
I do think it's funny that in Derry, no one ever really dies. Is a quote that Mrs. Kirsch says in the book, that Mrs. Kirsch says in It Chapter 2, and that Mrs. Kirsch says here. We've seen lots of transfer of certain quotes or reapplications of certain quotes, but this is one that has definitely been like linked to the character since its adaptation point.
Sure.
Which means,
and has anyone else ever said this, or is this just a Mrs. Kirsch thing?
This is just a Mrs. Kirsch thing. So in theory, we could have guessed this from the very first trailer for the show.
Mm-hmm.
But we were like, oh, maybe that's something else. It wasn't. So it'll be interesting to see, especially as it appears that this is a series that's being told backwards.
I feel like there are a lot of people who would disagree. Like, Bill. Because Georgie definitely dies.
Georgie definitely really dies. And then we have like sort of the sequence, the black and white sequence, where the poor old death of Mabel and not only the revelations that Miss Kirsch makes in her attic, but sort of what we learned from that scene that Miss Kirsch, working at Juniper Hill in the 30s, has been sort of feeding kids to it after this Mabel situation. Well, we get this very striking black and white sequence, which plays off of Bill Skarsgård being a giant, which I think is really fun. But also has a lot of interesting grace notes. The one that I noticed the most is when she says Papa, there's like a cock of its head where for a second it looks like confused about what it's going to do, which I think is an interesting take. As long as it's not fear, I'm up for it being startled by it having emotions. So I am mostly in favor of that acting decision. That being said, I was watching the behind the scenes and the director of the episode was like, for this sequence, I wanted to sort of lock down the camera a little bit more instead of like always pushing in or zooming around, but sort of allowing Pennywise to move through the space. Did that play for you while it was happening?
I think it's really effective, especially because it changes up. It's funny because I saw several times on my timeline people talking about this show and being, I guess pithy in their response to be like, what is this clown's deal? He always does the same thing. Whereas like he does this like fast run to the camera. Right. And it's kind of true, especially if you watch those first two movies, Pennywise kind of has his single move. So in this sequence in particular, they do two things that really differentiate. There's the one where he moves through the smoke. So we only see him kind of pop out, which is a good jump scare. And I think what's great about it is we go from seeing the red balloon to then just seeing the yellow of his eyes very quickly. And I think that's very effective. And I also think that like, the makeup prosthetic effects in this sequence are great. I think that like, especially the way that they make his forehead just extend, it just goes on forever is wild. But I really like toward the end of that sequence when Ingrid gets trapped behind the door and the little girl Mabel falls down and he stops and then he slow walks. And I genuinely think that's like 10 times creepier than his fast walk. And I almost feel like it's the show kind of responding to people's emotions about the fact that Pennywise only has one speed when he's chasing someone. Because it is Pennywise showing that he has a different gear and that it is equally as terrifying. That it's like once he knows that there's nowhere for Mabel to go, he just stops and does it in a way that will maximize the fear, which I think is thematically on point. And, as a person who does not like any sequence in which the clown is coming at me, very, very terrifying. And I like that there's not a lot of camera movement because, again, it just, now that he has arrived, it is allowing Bill Skarsgård to use whatever part of the space he wants to do all of these weird body movements and sort of give us a surprisingly fresh version of the clown.
Yeah. Good Pennywise. The one thing I want to shout out is I did chuckle at Charlotte's You Think You're Grown when she picks up William Dubois Hanlon and Ronnie right before it looks like they're about to kiss. And I do appreciate that, and I hope Charlotte makes it out okay. She's one of the people who could, in theory, make it out okay. Does it mean abandoning her son? I don't know. How are we going to deal with what we know happens to Will Hanlon in between here and there? Maybe that's something that we need to talk about as we transition into the storm. Neil, Is there anything else that we need to talk about here in the calm?
I don't think so. I'm ready to storm it up.
Let's do it.
Well, you got trouble, my friend. Right here, I say trouble right here.
What are you doing in the sewer?
The storm blew me away. Blew the whole circus away.
One thing that I could have put in the calm, but I stopped myself right as I was about to say it, was there's been an internal debate going on in my head about how in It Chapter 1 and in It Chapter 2, what of Ben's sort of research wall was it making itself appear in photographs to scare the children, and what was actually things in photographs. Because in It Chapter 1, when they talk about the ironworks fire, we see the Pennywise cart there. So did Ingrid lose her dad in the augury of 1935?
Interesting.
Like, was Bob Gray at the ironworks? Was he one of like the 14 adult victims or whatever it was in the giant explosion? Like, I guess my question overall is Mrs. Kirsch the character of this show? Is she the main character of this show? She's going to be in all 3 seasons of this show.
I mean, it seems possible, but that would make it really interesting when they get to like a season 3 that's focused on the 1918, right? That's the
1908.
1908, yeah. Because we've only seen a little bit of that, and we've seen her as a child in clown form now. And I guess we have to assume that Bob Gray was there in clown form. And we also saw the entity was in the woods at that time. So yeah, maybe 1935 is when the entity went from being, freewheeling woods creature to being Bob Gray, to taking Bob Gray. But that means that there's, 27 years of story where Bob Gray and his daughter were living in Derry as carnival performers.
I mean, I think there's just like the 1908. So we saw her in 1908. We know that the 1908 augury was at the ironworks explosion. So if in the episode that we saw her in, when Periwinkle was waiting by the cart and it had a whole bunch of red balloons, there's a human Bob Gray in there, which it appears like we might see in next week's episode based on the trailer.
Oh, wait. Okay. So wait, the 1908. Yeah, right. Okay. Sorry. I was confused. The 1935 one is the shootout.
Yes. So the 1935 one is the shootout.
So yeah, maybe he's in the fire.
So yeah, season 2, Mrs. Kirsch is a nurse at Juniper Hill who is feeding children to what she thinks is her father. We don't have to deal with that basically anymore this first season because we're going to have a whole second season to deal with that.
Sure.
And so we kind of don't have time. My guess is Miss Kirsch dies quickly once she shows up to Pennywise. And then there's like the season 3 would be Bob Gray would sort of be a protagonist. And we had talked about this, I think, a couple storms ago, where you keep Bill Skarsgård on, but he doesn't necessarily have to do the Pennywise shtick for all 3 seasons.
Sure.
He's still there as a featured player, but he's playing Bob Gray for most of the season.
Right. And maybe it's
we
about
get
how Bob Gray gets either corrupted into taking the form or sort of taken by the entity.
Right.
And maybe there's more as we go further and further back, we get more into the lore of the sort of indigenous tribe and how they were, maybe we finally deal with the pillars.
Yeah. I think like with the amount of time that we have left and the fact that we have certain stuff that we know is coming next week in terms of like the black spot burning, it's more and more likely to me that the only things that need to be shut down this season are like the characters that we know don't make it to It Chapter 1. All the other questions we have are actually questions for future seasons where we'll like the dramatic events of this season will play more ironically after we've seen the 1908 season, which is the only reason I think that might be giving the show too much credit is that is a tricky way to plan television arcs.
I mean, it is a very ambitious thing to do, especially if you don't know that you're already renewed for 3 seasons. But you know, I give them credit for trying it. It's definitely a unique approach.
If like in 2 weeks, General Shaw just dies immediately and we don't deal with the pillars, would that just be? That's what happened at the end of Welcome to Derry. That we just killed the army, and the army forgot what happened in Derry.
I'm kind of expecting something along those lines anyway, right? Like I'm kind of expecting the military thing. Not only does the military kind of have to lose this battle, but they have to lose the knowledge of what they were going after, because otherwise, wouldn't the military keep trying? Right? Like, wouldn't they still be trying in the 80s because the Cold War kept going? So this feels like one of those things where Shaw is sort of the linchpin of this mission, right? He's the guy who has all of the knowledge of what they're going after in Derry. You know, the higher ups in the military, whether they believe it or not, they trust that he could deliver them a weapon that could end the Cold War. And then it has to be such a massive failure that the people higher in the ladder in the military are just like, well, we're not going to go back, and we're just going to leave Derry alone from now on.
Yeah.
Because whatever we were looking for either isn't there or is not worth going after. So I think that, yeah, I don't see any way Shaw makes it out of this series. I could see like Rose making it out of the series and maybe being part of what covers up this situation and prevents anyone from coming back to keep the search going, right? Or maybe Rose and Dick Halloran conspiring to make sure that no one goes looking for the clown again in the future. But yeah, I don't think Shaw makes it.
Seems very likely. So one of the other rumors or theories, I'm not going to say rumors because it's not based on anything, I don't think. But theories I saw floating around was that Ronnie and Will are going to get together and they're going to be the parents of Mike, which goes against sort of, like I said in part 1, Veronica Grogan's voice comes from the drain. So it seems like she's a child victim. But now I'm wondering, Neil, if this is a way to deal with the fact that in between the ending of this series and the beginning of next series, Will and his eventual wife are going to burn to death inside of a house. Do you think Ronnie makes, or Hank makes some sort of devil's bargain for Will and Ronnie at the black spot where like they're cursed to burn, but they're allowed to live?
That would be interesting, because it's a little too, it's a little too similar, right? To be a coincidence that they will that we know that that's how Will dies eventually. And we know that
and that's his fear of how he's going to die because he's afraid of his dad, all burned up all dad.
That's kind of wild. I kind of like that theory. And especially given the way that, you know, Hank sort of has this little monologue this week about, you know, if something were to happen to me. And then we see in the trailer for next week somebody taking Pennywise's hand. So maybe that's Hank making a deal with Pennywise to be like, these 2 kids get to live. But, you know, eventually they aren't going to make it. Or, you know how demons go. You know how demon bargains go. There's always a twist.
I just think there's a place here to give like a narrative finality to why those 2 burn without having to like flash forward or anything like that. That could be like romantically tragic, because I do think that's where we're headed in all of the trailer footage we've seen of the Mist stuff, where it looks like Mist takes over Derry and there's a whole bunch of floating kids. it's the three girls and the dagger, the three girls in the mist. It's Lily, it's Ronnie, it's Marge, and they have the dagger and they're going through the mist. And I'm wondering if that is a vengeance group, that they've all lost somebody, which brings me to another very disturbing trailer shot where a tiny soot-covered hand in red plaid is peeking out from beneath a blanket, which I think means that Rich's drumming this episode was him arcing out in his full charm.
Poor kid.
So I'm guessing he doesn't make it out. Do you think he has a noble sacrifice moment, or do you think it's just he's too short to climb out the window?
No, I think he saves Marge. And I think that the payoff of him being the namesake of Richie and her being Richie's mom is great. And if that's, if the next 2 episodes starts the series down a path of like connecting a bunch of dots to the losers of the 1980s, that's kind of fun. Like what else are you going to do, right? This is the same story world, right? This is the same creative team that made those movies, and they are sort of getting to play around with this, with this adaptation in a way that they can sort of move stuff around when they need it to. But I think that is would be satisfying for folks who are big fans to be able to say like, all right, I like how that they've tied this to the movies in some very specific ways.
Yeah. This was something I was kind of holding back about when we were talking about Dick Halloran and eventually getting to The Shining, is if I were pitching this as a single season show, I wouldn't bet enough to connect to The Shining. I would bet all my possibly too cheesy things on connecting to the original movies, to keeping it in the IP. So I am, even though when I first heard Ronnie is Mike's mom, I was like, that doesn't jive with me. It does. This like sort of like Kirsch does kind of jive with me, because I had and
that would also explain why Beverly would hear her name in the pipes, right? That would make her an eventual victim of it.
That would. And then it would also mean that somehow Will was doomed to be in Derry, which would somehow explain to me at least how Leroy is still there come chapter 1, because I would get the F out of there if there was any other way to save my son. But if I could only save my son if I stay in Derry, maybe I stay in Derry. So I'm looking to see how many things they could make tragic. How many facts about it chapter 1 can they make tragic in these last 2 episodes? Yeah. I think will be interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's an interesting way to sort of misdirect all of the message board warrior TV watchers, right? Because this show has, at least for us, has had us so focused on how are they going to build the story in reverse to these other events. And now we're sort of shifting to, oh, wait, they are going to connect a bunch of dots to going forward, right? Where it's not just about everybody has to lose and then the clown comes back in the 80s, but now these things are all going to be potentially connected. I kind of like that.
Yeah. And then, so how I think next week's episode, The Black Spot's going to play out. I couldn't find a full episode description for it, but we do have from the teaser, we have like a Dick Halloran in the woods, which seems like to me it's going to play after The Black Spot, because we had in a previous trailer him being surrounded by a whole bunch of burnt people, which now reads to me as The Black Spot. Before I thought it maybe was him having a war flashback, but I think he's been, because his box is opened, he's going to be able to directly talk to them. And I imagine the forest is the forest around the Black Spot, which makes me kind of wonder where the Black Spot is geographically, but I don't think we're going to have that much time to care. So I guess my question for you is, if Dick is the person that sort of gives us our flashback or parts of our flashback, how much of this episode coming up do you think is actually the burning down and the sort of standoff at the black spot.
I mean, like I said in the calm, I think it could go either way, right? Like it could be the majority of the episode, or it could be like a first 20 minutes type of thing, and then we have sort of the fallout. It just kind of depends on where they position these flashbacks. It also does seem like before the fire starts, at least from this trailer, we're going to have a certain amount of standoff, right?
Mhm.
Where we're just going to have some talking between the masked dudes and the people who are in the black spot. So
Right.
we may have a situation where we start with the standoff, we have some flashback, the standoff continues, we have a little bit more flashback, and we work our way up to the fire. And then the fire is sort of the third act of the episode. And then that, closes us out in the penultimate episode, and then the finale is all about what happens after that. So, I don't know. I feel like the entire episode is going to be sort of centered around this one location.
Mm-hmm.
But whether or not the fire happens first or whether or not we build toward it is sort of up in the air in my mind, because there's still a lot of stuff you can do with flashbacks, and then Dick Halloran because he leaves, right? Like we see him. Does he go outside before those dudes show up?
No, he's inside.
Oh, he's inside.
Standing in the corner.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and we see he's definitely in a fire-filled environment in the teaser. So I think he's definitely there.
Yeah.
Like, the question for me is, so like the flashbacks, it looks like we're going to see original Bob Gray as Pennywise. We're going to see the Barker. We're going to see him talk to Periwinkle. We know that for sure. That would read as weird for me to happen after Periwinkle and Pennywise meet each other.
mm-hmm.
So if Mrs. Kirsch is dressing up to go to the black spot, we're going to see our flashbacks earlier in the episode.
Sure.
Because I think the second,
Like maybe
she tries to...
we don't return to the black spot immediately in this episode.
Right.
We don't return to where the cliffhanger left us. We start with Mrs. Kirsch.
Or so we start with somebody and then weave in Mrs. Kirsch, or we start with the flashback, go to like Lily, and then go to Mrs. Kirsch. Like, I think I also think Charlotte kind of needs to be there. We haven't seen her in any of the stuff, but it would be weird because she's so involved with Hank and she's sort of packed up to go there at the end of this episode. So I think we have a lot to deal with before we actually get to like the burning. I guess the other thing that I'm wondering about, and this has me wondering about the race politics of it all, is there is a way that even though we have a whole bunch of white dudes surrounding the black spot, that they soften it a little bit more. So there's like a Mexican standoff, but then everybody sees the fucking clown.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clown attack starts a fire, starts everything burning down. And we sort of soft walk the textual basis of it being like literally basically the Klan, just doing it because it was a black place where black people are having fun. Where now it's like, not only is Hank there, but they show up. There's a very natural standoff, but it's basically, I've gathered you here today to be flying it, to be, like another version of Pennywise that sort of kicks it all off.
Well, and I think thematically that would make sense because, as we've talked about through the first 6 episodes of the show, there's a really good chance that the entity is using the racial tensions of the time to further amplify tension in the town.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's very likely that it chose Hank specifically because it knew, like, it chose the movie theater because it knew Hank would get blamed, and it put Periwinkle in a relationship with Hank specifically to create this situation where an entire town full of white people got mad at this one black guy. And then, it's now orchestrating this situation where everyone's converging on this club that is meant to be sort of this free hideaway for the black soldiers. And now we got all these, drunk racist white dudes showing up. And so like, it is one of those situations where the clown can show up, set everything on fire, and kind of get away with it because any external party, any onlooker, like a military general in Washington who's reading a file weeks later will just be like, this is just another, week in America in the 1960s where racial tension boiled over in a small town and some shit went down, and they won't even think to question it any further. They won't be like, was there a supernatural clown involved? And that, helps the clown never draw more attention than it needs, in this situation.
The AV Club review did notice that one person listed in the credits for this week's episode was listed as Lone Lady Black Spot Survivor.
Oh, no.
So things are not going good for the ladies, at least at the very least, next week. But yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see where they divide it and sort of what needs to be in the finale and what climaxes they can sort of put here.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm worried for the kids, but quite a few of the kids are in parts of trailers that look like the finale. So it's mostly just like Rich that I'm really worried about.
Yep, Rich and Will, who we know needs to survive.
Yeah.
So he gets a little bit of a pass. All right, Neil. Is there anything else that we need to talk about before we dismiss people for this week?
I think we covered it. I like the way it built this cliffhanger. I'm interested to see how they use the time that they have given themselves in these next two episodes, and very curious to see when we will return to the like Rose, General Shaw, Taniel of it all. But I almost think that that's not going to happen at all next week. Like that is a finale thing. So I feel like my instinct tells me that next week's episode is all about what's about to go down in the black spot and what sort of reverberations that has in flashback.
Can't wait to find out why the black spot is not the augury, and apparently we have a whole missed episode going on. But we'll talk about that more in the storm next week. Until then, go out there, be excellent to each other, and no, just be excellent to each other. Let a kid have an Air Force Coke every once in a while if he wants.